So we're good, Tim, with everybody who's here?
Well, we can start until Minister Tough down and his team is here.
Right, his team is here, just not him. They're with him. All right, good evening, everyone. So I don't need to come on the screen, Richard. Just to give everyone inside the room a 2-minute countdown. We can start in about 2 minutes. For media listening on, we're giving you a 2-minute countdown so you can do your station IDs and get over, which means that it is now 6:37 and a half. We expect to begin precisely at 6:30.
All phones on silent, please.
Good evening and welcome to the Media Center here at the Office of the Prime Minister in Kingston, Jamaica. Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, held another meeting of Cabinet today. As is now customary, and given his commitment, the Prime Minister will update Jamaica on the decisions of Cabinet regarding the COVID-19 pandemic affecting Jamaica. This evening, we're pleased to have with us several members of Cabinet who will provide resource for the Prime Minister as he speaks to the nation. We have, of course, the Minister of Health, Dr. the Honorable Christopher Tufton, the Minister of Finance, Dr. the Honorable Nigel Clark, the Minister of National Security, the Honorable Dr. Horace Chang, the Honorable Desmond McKenzie, Minister of Local Government, the Honorable Darrell Vaz, Minister without Portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, the Honorable Favour Williams, the Minister of Energy. We also have with us the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, the Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, as well as the team from the Ministry of Health, Dr. Karen Webster-Carr, the Principal Medical Officer and National Epidemiologist, as well as the Permanent Secretary here at the Ministry of, well, it is a ministry, the Office of the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, Mrs. Audrey Sewell. Last week, members of the umbrella group of churches asked that, given what is happening in Jamaica, that we begin our press conference with prayer, and we have kindly consented. We have today with us, to start off the press conference, Dr. Patricia Holness, representing the Jamaica Pentecostal Union in the umbrella group of churches via the Zoom platform, as well as Bishop Dr. Delford Davis from the Power Faith Ministries in Portmore. They'll both offer a very brief prayer ahead of our start here this afternoon, and then of course we'll have Prime Minister the Most Honorable Andrew Holness. They've asked that all the Cabinet Ministers here stand while we pray. Dr. Holness.
Most Honorable Prime Minister and his team, fellow Jamaicans, Almighty God, we stand before you today because you are great. You are God. You are God Almighty. Lord Jesus, you never change, and there is nothing about you that will change. We thank you, Lord, for the opportunity of joining the host of Jamaicans who are praying for your intervention. Right now, God, we know we can depend on you. We thank you, Lord, for covering our Prime Minister, and even as he shall give to the nation today the things that have been decided. Let, my God, there be unity among all of us. Let there be favor to Jamaica. Hallelujah. Let, Lord, your love and your support rest upon us, Lord, because you are a present help in the time of trouble. Therefore will not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountain be carried into the midst of the sea. We thank you for your favor in this meeting. We thank you for this press conference. Bless our leaders, Lord. Bless them in every way and their families. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you so much for the intervention of the church. Dr. Davis, who represents several constituents, especially in Portmore as well. Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
And all members of,
yes, go ahead, sir.
all members of the delegation, let us look to God in prayer. Our gracious God, we thank you that you have said to us repeatedly through your words that we should come to you confidently. We should come boldly, knowing that when we come to you, we come as children to our dear Heavenly Father. We recognize our service to you, to mankind, and ask, Lord, that you continue to guide our steps. We thank you for our Prime Minister and member of the delegation that sit this evening, Lord God, for this conference. We have asked you through the national anthem to grant our leaders true wisdom from above. Once again, we ask you, Lord, to do so. We pray that this evening's gathering will be for your glory and for your honor, and that the matters that will be discussed, oh God, we pray that they will indeed redound to the good of our nation. So will you bless our leaders now? Will you stand by them in a very special way? We know that wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, they all come from you, O God. And when the king could not understand the dream, nor could not get the interpretation thereof, Lord God, through the wisdom of your servant, they were revealed unto him. As they take, O God, the responsibility of fronting this national crisis, we pray that you be with them and grant, O Lord, that Jamaica will emerge the better, the stronger, the more united after all this is over and done. So bless this meeting, we pray, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much to Doctors Holness and Davis for their kind consent to open in prayer this evening. Of course, joining us as well is a very, very crucial person to the government and certainly in terms of advice to Cabinet, the Attorney General, Mrs. Marlene Malahoo Fort. Ladies and gentlemen, I now turn over to the Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness.
Thank you, Naomi. A good evening to everyone who's here at the OPM press room. And a good evening to Jamaicans at home and abroad. It is truly a trying time for all of us, for the entire world. But we must never forget our humanity. And we must never forget that there is a power that will see us through all of this. And I was very happy to have the church appeal to that power and pray to that power for our health, our safety, and our security. I want to start the press conference today by addressing a most upsetting issue. I mean, it is an issue that is personally upsetting to me. Even at this early stage, from the information in the public domain so far, it appears that the duty of care owed to Jodian Ferran was not executed. The case must be fully investigated. And already the police have commenced their own investigation to determine if anyone was criminally negligent. But even before the case is completed, I think the public sentiment of being totally appalled, of being angry at the situation is very much justified. In the midst of crisis, no matter what the panic is, no matter what the fear is, we must all seek to protect lives. And a strong message has to be sent from all levels of government that this incident does not reflect the government's position. This is not something that we will in any way seek to have hidden, covered up, not thoroughly investigated. The full force of the state and all its resources must be placed in ensuring that we get to the bottom of this issue, and those who are responsible must be held to account. There can be no second guessing this intention. Many calls have been made about how that investigative process should be done. The Cabinet spent some time considering how this should be done, and we have decided that we want to ensure that whatever action the government takes in investigating, that it in no way compromises any legal action that any of the parties involved may seek to take. So we have asked the Attorney General to consider carefully the direction in which the government's investigation into this matter should go. Already, administrative investigations are underway and probably by now completed. I'll invite the Minister of Health to give an update as to where we are in terms of our administrative investigation. But there have been calls for other forms of investigation, which we are sympathetic to, we have considered, but we just want to be sure that whatever action that we take, it does not in any way impact upon other civil or criminal actions that could be taken in our courts. So by tomorrow, the Attorney General will give us some advice, and then we will speak further as to how the government will proceed. The matter brings out an issue which the entire Jamaica must be sensitive to, and that is the issue of stigmatizing persons who are either confirmed positive or suspected to be positive. The extreme cases have come to my attention of families being totally ostracized by their communities, members of communities put out of their community, people threatened with physical violence. And now we have a situation where a young Jamaican has died. We all, and I started with the point and I want to end on this point, we must always remember our humanity. We cannot allow fear and panic to overtake good sense and professional duty. Minister Tufton.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Colleagues, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, members of the listening public. First of all, I want to just echo the sentiments expressed by the Honorable Prime Minister as it relates to young Jodian Ferron. For me, as the person leading the charge at the level of the Ministry of Health and Wellness against the COVID-19 threat, this incident represents for me one of the saddest moments in the series of events which has seen many challenges associated with this particular threat. I am indeed saddened by the occurrence which has led up to young Jodian Ferron's untimely passing, and I believe all of us in the Ministry of Health and Wellness, indeed, as the Prime Minister said, all of us at cabinet level and all of the country are understandably upset about the incident. When news came of what transpired, I immediately consulted with the key technocrats of the ministry, the leadership, also the leadership of a number of the hospitals involved, and I have asked for a thorough investigation at the level of the ministry and report to be generated so that a determination can be made, as outlined by the Prime Minister, for the strongest possible actions to be taken to bring justice where justice is required, but also to ensure that this does not reoccur in any way, shape, or form. The reason, if I were to advance one, why we do not have a final report to share with the country, and why I ask for patience until another day or so, perhaps tomorrow, hopefully, is because the incident involves a number of institutions. So it started out with the Andrews Memorial Hospital, a private health institution, with a private patient, which Jody Ann Ferran was. It involved or included, not too long after, the Victoria Jubilee Hospital, then the Spanish Town Hospital, and then the University Hospital of the West Indies. All of those institutions were asked to submit the appropriate reports and information so that an assessment can be made and a final report drafted which would reflect all the concerns, all the sentiments of the particular situation. And so we have in possession those reports from the individual institutions. The team is now weighing over those reports with the intention of producing a final report. Based on those consultations, as discussed at Cabinet, I believe we'll be in a position to make a more definitive statement on the matter as early as tomorrow sometime. So I ask the country for their patience, even though I fully understand and appreciate the upset that this has caused. And again, I express condolences to the family members, to the friends of young Jody Ann Ferran, who I have no doubt are anxiously awaiting more details on this particular situation. As requested by the Prime Minister, I want to just give the basic information on our current COVID scenario. We wish to advise, firstly, however, that there is a slight correction that is required since yesterday's announcement, in that two cases or two samples from yesterday's announcement were repeat samples for patients. So we want to adjust from the 250 that was announced to 248 because apparently there was a duplication in two cases. So yesterday was actually 248. Today, the number of confirmed COVID-19 cases has risen to 364. So from 248 to 348 to 364, which means 16 additional cases in the last 24 hours. 143 or 39% confirmed cases are male, 241 or 61% are female, while the ages of all confirmed cases ranges from the 2 months to 87 years. Included in the 16 cases are 7 males and 9 females, having ages ranging from 3 years to 77 years. 7 of the 16 cases are associated with the workplace cluster, and 1 case is a contact case of a confirmed case, and the other 8 cases are under investigation. In terms of case classifications, there are now 34 imported cases, 8 that are local transmission with no epidemiological link, 94 contacts of a confirmed case, 46 that are under investigation, and 182 cases are connected to the particular workplace cluster. Indeed, in addition to the 182 that's linked to the workplace cluster, 37 additional cases are contacts of that workplace cluster, which brings, therefore, the workplace cluster plus the contacts to 219, which is the majority, of course, of the number of cases that we have. We are still doing a lot of work in the parish of St. Catharine, and the Prime Minister will speak more to that. But in particular, we have another 50 or so employees of that particular workplace cluster to contact and to manage their particular case, and approximately 250 contacts of that 50. So approximately 300 or so persons that we're still working on in an attempt to contain and control the potential for further spread, not just in that parish, but beyond. We continue to advise all employees to remain at home until they are contacted by the St. Catharine Health Department. Even if the 14-day period quarantine has expired, employees are also reminded that the absence of symptoms does not mean, very importantly, does not mean that one does not have COVID-19. Indeed, because of the age profile of that population, a younger population from that particular institution, they are primarily asymptomatic. Simply put, they have no particular symptoms, not a cold, not a fever, not a cough, but they have the virus. And this is not unusual, particularly in younger generation. And at the same time, there is still the possibility of spread. And it is in the spread and spreading to your older population, many of whom may be your relatives, your mothers and fathers and grandparents, that major danger could be created and life-threatening illness could follow. So we ask that they take the virus seriously, even if they believe that they have no symptoms or they don't feel any symptoms. The quarantined person should have little or no contact with other members of the household and restrict visits from friends and or family. So that's what quarantine means. Keep to yourself. Quarantined person should also cover their mouths when they cough or sneeze with a tissue and then throw it away in a covered bin. Must wash hands using soap and water before and after using the bathroom. Coughing or sneezing. Avoid touching eyes and mouth, especially after sneezing or coughing, and restrict members of the household from utilizing the same bathroom. We repeat this with every meeting that we have, but it's important that persons understand the messaging that lies within those words. It is about protecting you and protecting those around you. And we continue to promote the 8881 Love or 888-633-5687 if you need to make contact. I want to just emphasize again that for persons who are feeling down, because we know that your mental state, particularly in quarantine and isolation circumstances, can be affected. We do have a mental health hotline that can provide you with support. And I want to just indicate that number is 888-NEW-LIFE or 888-639-5433. In terms of testing, we have done 3,621 samples have been collected. And this marks, Prime Minister and colleagues, a significant increase over the past week. This is because we have installed a new testing set of equipment at the public health lab, and that is now in operation. It's doing on average 300 or thereabouts per day. It can do a lot more, but we're slowly ramping that up to do more testing. And today at the University Hospital of the West Indies, we received a generous gift from the Jamaica Public Service Company of 2 additional machines that could add an additional 700 samples to be tested every 6 hours for the entire 24-hour period, so 700 for the day, which means that we can now test quite a lot more samples. The challenge will remain how we adjust the protocol in order to get those samples. So 3,621, 364 positive, 3,231 negative, 26 are pending. We have 334 persons in isolation and 92 in quarantine in a government facility. 29 persons have recovered to date, and unfortunately 7 have died. I think I will stop there, Prime Minister, unless there are any questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for that update. On the Jodian Ferron issue, I'd just like to say publicly that we note the request of Jodian's family that this matter be dealt with a level of respect for the privacy and dignity of the family, and to say that our deepest and sincere condolence to the family, and that we mourn with you, and that the government, as I said before, will do everything to ensure that there is accountability and justice in this matter. I want to turn to St. Catharine. We've been observing the state of the 24-hour curfew in St. Catharine. It started off with not a very high level of compliance on the movement days that were declared. We made some adjustments, and I believe that from our last assessment of the movement day on Saturday, and we did some assessment on Friday as well, generally there was a higher level of compliance, and that was due to refinement in the orders, which allowed more days, and we opened the financial institutions. But I think as well, the residents of St. Catharine themselves should be commended, because many of them have voluntarily complied with the orders. And we note, and I wish to commend the residents of St. Catharine, that on the no movement days, we have seen an extremely high level of compliance on those days. And that gives us a great deal to be confident in the sense that during those days, if there were transmission taking place on those days, that transmission would be interrupted in a significant way. Nevertheless, as Minister Tufton pointed out, being in a lockdown situation, as we call it, which is not effectively a lockdown situation. I want to be clear with Jamaica. We have put in place a 24-hour curfew with many exemptions, and we have allowed significant movement days. So you can imagine then what a real lockdown could be like. We have not gone into any form of real lockdown. And but even with this minimal level of our 24-hour curfew with many exemptions, people can still feel a sense of being locked in, a sense of isolation, and it can lead to many behaviors that within themselves could create problems. So the government is seized of the importance of ensuring that these measures are not extended beyond what is necessary. And the cabinet spent a significant amount of time going over the measures in Portmore. And the ultimate question is asked, are the measures defeated on movement days? When everybody is moving around, when people are not following social distancing? Is that going to contribute to the spread? We have to follow the numbers, and what the numbers tell us, and I'm going to just briefly run through some figures, is that from the numbers we have from the 26th of April 2020, there were 196 cases in St. Catharine. 150 of those were from the workplace cluster. So it tells you that a large number, well, a significant number of the cases, this looks more like almost more than 70% of the cases in Portmore would be, in St. Catharine rather, would be from the workplace cluster. It tells me as well that, the data that is, that we have outstanding in terms of contact tracing and identifying persons who are either positive or suspected to be positive, that we have approximately 300 more persons within St. Catharine that the Public Health Department needs to interview and to do contact tracing with. It means, therefore, that there is good reason to extend the measures for St. Catharine. We have, however, decided, as was announced last week, to take out of St. Catharine the persons that we have confirmed to be positive and some of their contacts. And the minister would have indicated that we have put in place measures for approximately 204 persons out of the entire number of that workplace cluster. And most of these persons would be persons who are positive, who have been tested and confirmed as having the virus. Now, many of them are asymptomatic, meaning that they show no signs of the illness. So we are tracing down now another 300 persons that we would like to either take them out of the community or put them under home quarantine if their home situation allows it, or put in place other measures such as isolation if their facilities allow that. So we need the additional time. And the reason why I'm giving these numbers is that you can see that the measures that have been put in place, the public health measures of doing the contact tracing, identifying those who are infected, putting measures around them, either quarantining them or putting them in a state quarantine facility, that those measures would have largely worked. And what facilitated that would be the broader measures, that is the 24-hour curfew, and even with the exemptions that we have put in place, that is the movement of essential and critical workers to be able to come to work, the movement days for shopping, that we have largely contained the outbreak in St. Catharine to the cluster at the workplace. And we need more time to continue to do this because there may be persons who are part of that cluster or connected to that cluster who we have not yet managed to interview, to identify, and to test. So we have decided, and let me just refer to my notes here. The Cabinet has decided, on the advice of the Ministry of Health, that the curfew, the 24-hour curfew for St. Catharine, be extended for a further 3 days, commencing at 6 a.m. on Tuesday, April the 28th, and ending at 6 a.m. on Friday, May 1, 2020. Those 3 days will follow as the order had declared them in terms of which day would be a shopping day, which day would be a stocking day, which day would be a no movement day. So we will extend the curfew in St. Catharine. Today, April 27, was a shopping day, and therefore tomorrow would be what is called a stocking day. So that is a no movement day for citizens, but for persons who are who have shops and supermarkets, they are allowed to have movement for restocking. I want to now turn to the issue of the re-entry of Jamaicans. Let me say that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of National Security, has been working very closely with many of our Jamaicans overseas who have reached out to us. We estimate by the numbers that we have seen so far that there are over 5,000 Jamaicans who would want to come back home. Certainly, that's what we know of. There are others out there who may not have made contact with us. The way in which this is done, it has to be transparent. There has to be clear and good reason as to how we order the re-entry into the country. The advice given from the public health experts in Jamaica is that re-entry has to be done under clear rules of quarantine. That we couldn't just reopen the border for general re-entry because it introduces a new risk. We have established what the local risk is, and you would see with the Alarica case that immediately as there was the outbreak in that workplace cluster, that the Ministry of Health was able to jump on it very quickly, to do the contact tracing, and largely contain it. But you see the difficulty in containing an outbreak. There are persons who are literally in hiding. When the public health team goes to find them, they disappear. They give wrong addresses, but they are out there and they are a potential risk. Now, reintroducing a new population would increase that risk, and it would stretch the resources of public health, but it would also stretch the resources of the hospital facilities, because if people begin to get ill, then they have to go into hospital care. So the ability to order re-entry into the country depends largely on our ability to structure a quarantine arrangement. There are other logistics involved in that, but the main obstacle would be how to quarantine, 5,000 persons, 1,000 or 2,000 at a time. Where would the rooms come from, the cost involved with that, the logistics of transportation, and the quarantine is recommended for 14 days. But even then, that is not an absolute. So we have worked out what we call the end-to-end protocol. That is from where our Jamaican citizens are, in whichever country they are, how they make contact with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, how they indicate their circumstances to us so we can judge how to treat with them, and then the whole logistics of how do they actually move from where they are to come back to Jamaica because there are no regular flights. That is a major logistics to consider, the airlift. And then when they get to Jamaica, to move them from the airport to the quarantine facilities. Of course, to actually identify and get those rooms. We have had a difficult time in getting rooms. I want to thank those hoteliers who have put their property to the use of the country to provide the quarantine facilities. The Grand Bahia Principe and others have been very good to us in allowing some of their rooms. And I encourage all the hoteliers to consider, allowing some of your rooms to be available in the national fight against COVID. Again, I want to point out that there's great stigma attached, but now is not the time for that. And every single Jamaican must realize that we are all in this fight together. We are all in this fight together. And the COVID-19 is not a death sentence. It is not something that individuals should be scorned, because the truth is the probability and indeed the possibility is that at some point in time, maybe not now, maybe not tomorrow, but this disease is going to be around. This virus is around now. So the possibility is that all of us at some point in time will get it. And I think we have to be as blunt as that to the nation. What we are trying to do is to control so that there isn't a spike that if persons get it, they can't get treatment. Or if there is a spike, it doesn't overwhelm our hospital. So all the effort that you see we are making with putting in place these measures for Portmore in particular, where there was a spike. And I think you could say by the numbers now we have largely controlled it. We need a couple of more days to truly bring it under control. It is likely that you will see outbreaks like this over and over and over again. But we have to manage it, and part of the management of it is what we're about to discuss now. It is the controlled re-entry of Jamaicans. And I tell you, I'm very sympathetic. I read the letter of the Barbadian student, the Jamaican students in Barbados who want to come home. I get many messages on my WhatsApp. I have people from the Mariela too sending me notes. All over, people are, pleading their case. But for every individual who wants to come home, bear in mind, you have almost 5,000 more. And the incredible logistics that has to be put in place to ensure that that happens in an orderly and seamless way. Just to report on the Jamaicans who came in between the 18th and the 24th, by and large, I gather that maybe a few hundred, maybe 200 or 300 have not reported, but by and large, most have reported, and I want to thank them for giving us the information, because that information allows us now to plan, to deploy resources, and to have a good idea of what the threat could be. So I'm going to invite Minister Johnson-Smith to come up, and while she comes up, just to say that we have developed an application, an app, and a website. It is jamcovid19.moh.gov.jm, jamcovid19 on the Apple Store, and I believe by now it should be on the Google Play Store, jamcovid19. So I invite Minister Johnson-Smith to give you an overview of both what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been doing and an overview on the app and how the app will be used to assist in the re-entry process.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Prime Minister. Sir, I think it will take another press briefing to talk about what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been doing, because we have missions which are taking as many as 500 calls a day now, persons asking what's happening, when can they come back, what is the process, and just tell them so they can come here. We understand that the anxiety is high, remains to be high. You have heard, however, some of the constraints that the Prime Minister has just shared with you. But what he has been clear on as well is that we do have a process, it is transparent, and it is based on some principles to help you understand how it will operate. The three basic principles are that we recognize that we cannot keep our borders closed indefinitely, and our citizens have a right to return home. Secondly, that the re-entry of our citizens overseas must be done in a manner that protects and preserves the health of all Jamaican citizens and must therefore be within the capacity of our public health care system in the context of addressing the COVID-19 pandemic. And thirdly, that given the limited capacity of our public healthcare system, we must at this time give priority to those Jamaicans who are the most vulnerable and are facing the most hardship. So the new protocols provide for all Jamaicans who wish to return home to do so, but it provides for this to be done on a gradual and phased basis within the confines of the capacity of our healthcare system to provide quarantine and isolation facilities for each person. It also requires that we consider the number of healthcare professionals which it takes to monitor the quarantine and isolation facilities, as these are the same individuals which also undertake contact tracing and the other aspects of the response of the healthcare system to the COVID outbreak. Another reality which operates as a constraint is the fact that within the demands of treatment, the risk of further spread of the virus, Jamaica unfortunately does not have the resources to charter flights or to pay for the return of our nationals. Persons will therefore be responsible for making their own arrangements for travel, taking into consideration the limited availability of flights. We know that many of our citizens, however, at whom these protocols are targeted, so not the general overseas community who always wants to come home, but our citizens who traveled before travel restrictions were implemented globally and who now wish to return. We recognize that they mostly have return tickets for flights which would have been canceled. And accordingly, we have started informing the airlines of our new protocols for controlled reentry and advising them that nationals who still hold tickets for their airlines will now be seeking to rebook once they have received the travel authorization through our new online portal. So let me tell you a bit more specifically about the portal. As you may see on the screen, the website where the portal is available is jamcovid19.moh.gov.jm. When you go on that website, you click on immigration and you will see a form that asks you to sign in with your email. So if you don't have an email address, ask somebody to help you quickly set one up on Gmail or any other of the free sites. It only takes 5 minutes, maybe less, so that you will have your own email to use as your unique identifier for applying for return. You sign in, it will send you back what they call an OTP, which is a one-time password. It sends you back a password so that it's clear that you are the person applying, and you will be able now to be identified within the system so that any additional information that's needed, any problems that come up, you can be communicated with directly through the app. So when you have signed in, you'll be asked information. Once you've gotten your email address and your one-time password, you then sign in with that email address, and you'll be required to fill in some personal information, just like you would when you're traveling. So for airline information and immigration information, you give your name, your phone number, your email address, your passport number, of course, the date you left Jamaica on, and the reason for travel. But it will also give you the opportunity to set out some information that you think might be critical for the government to know in considering your application. And when I say government, I actually mean PICA, our immigration authority, which considers these matters now manually, generally. As this return facilitation is taking place in the context of the highly infectious COVID-19 disease, you will be asked some health questions. You'll be asked about any symptoms that you have. It will ask you to declare that you have no symptoms if you have none, because it will provide you with a list. It will ask you about any underlying any critical health conditions that you might have. Information which will be considered by the public health officials. So it's not going anywhere else, it goes to your public health officials. For the screening that will take place also by PICA, who will verify the information you have submitted. So it will check that your passport is in fact issued by Jamaica in your name with the number and the information that you have given. Because of course this is a high security issue. It is the matter of travel and immigration during an infectious disease. When you have submitted your information, you will either get, within 3 days, conditional approval, or you will be asked for to answer additional questions by either health or PICA. As the Prime Minister mentioned, Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been in touch with many Jamaicans who are experiencing hardship. Those persons will be given specific consideration in this process. If you have been identified as a high priority travel recommendation, if you are someone who we have been in touch with and already providing assistance, so we know that your needs are verified, urgent, and critical, then you will be flagged for priority in consideration once the other matters, that is your health sign-in, your travel document verification, have been approved by the relevant authorities. So persons who have registered with the missions and who have been receiving assistance with the missions, your information is with us, and if it is not with us, we ask you to make sure that we have your passport number, make sure we have your email address, make sure we have the information that requires us to ensure that your challenges are taken into consideration when the applications come through. Because, as said earlier, there are limited beds, and quarantine takes place in the very clear and strict protocols of the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Let me tell you just a bit about that, because persons coming in and using this application process will have to agree. You will have to agree to mandatory state quarantine. At this time, it's not an option to decide later that you think you want to go home. 14 days quarantine, you will have to agree to that before you come in. And it is important to recognize that the quarantine will take place in cohorts of set numbers. Very specifically managed, because if persons are quarantined at the start of different dates and one person gets sick, it may cause a resetting of the 14-day period. So persons are placed together, or rather placed in the same location and monitored at the 14-day period. And that's why the limited access is so important, because we have to make sure persons can be managed effectively in the interests of their health and the health of all Jamaicans. So it is important for us to also note that we are working on stronger and more effective mechanisms for home quarantine eventually. So these may include having sufficient capacity to verify home addresses that are provided, and also to verify that the location provided is one where it is appropriate for quarantine or isolation. So is it a home where you can be separate from your family, and therefore if you do develop symptoms, you would not have spread to your family, and as well as the consideration of GPS tracking, as has been used effectively in other jurisdictions, in order to ensure that the quarantine is being respected. So we're not there yet, but we are considering it, because we recognize that the smaller numbers that will have to be accepted at this initial stage will cause some frustration in our communities overseas. We encourage you, however, again, to remember to visit jamcovid19.moh.gov.jm. It will be a zero-rated site, so you don't need a data plan to visit it. We will soon have the updated app available in the Apple App Store and in the Google Play Store. They're both being considered now for approval, and we're there any day, but the website works just fine. We have tested it recently when we facilitated a repatriation based on a flight organized by the government of Antigua and Barbuda to repatriate their citizens. We were able to test its operation with our return of some Jamaicans who were stranded in Antigua and Barbuda using the website, and it worked end-to-end perfectly. Just to advise that in return for these circumstances as well, it won't be the type of situation where your family comes to the airport to greet you, etc. There will be managed greeting, plainside, and organized transportation immediately from plainside to the location for quarantine, where you will be tested for the COVID-19 disease at the start of the quarantine period. So it will be important for you when you advise your family of when eventually you are able to come, that they will need to try to be in touch with you. Otherwise, you will tell them where you're going to be quarantined, because that will not be a secret, but your access will of course be limited, and their access to you will be limited, because the intention is to ensure that we manage the importation of the disease, given that that is how it was introduced to Jamaica. So we're having to balance the welcoming back of you, our wonderful citizens, in a way that respects and protects the health of the entire population. We will be providing more information in the days to come, but as explained, visit the website, sign in, and your application will be considered. Airlines will not accept your booking until a travel authorization certificate is issued at the end of this process. So if you have been visiting the websites and wondering why your booking is not going through, it's because you will need a travel authorization through this website in order for the airlines to accept your booking. We will be in discussions with them just to ensure that there is an awareness of how the process is unfolding. But as indicated earlier, you will be expected to make your own travel arrangements, as it is absolutely and regretfully impossible for us to consider payment and chartering for the number of Jamaicans who wish to come home. We wish you well, and we look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for that comprehensive overview of what the government has been doing. Again, let me repeat that we are very sympathetic to the situation of Jamaicans who are overseas. Many of them are experiencing hardship, but as you would have heard from the Minister, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, through the consulates and through the good offices of other agencies that we have good relationship overseas, have been supporting and assisting as much as we can. But we know, we have long believed it's time to get you back home. The question is, how do we do it without compromising the local health strategy that has been in place and that has been working? And just to point out that though we have adopted a risk-based management approach, it doesn't mean that we dispense with strategies such as controlled reentry and contact tracing. We need those strategies to be in place to prevent outbreaks. And you would have seen in the Bpo sector, for example, just one workplace, and that workplace now has more than 70% of the cases for the entire Jamaica. Just one instance. So we just have to be absolutely careful about what we're doing. We have to preserve Jamaica for you who are overseas and for the Jamaicans who are here. And I think that the measures that we have put in place, though they have been very careful, sometimes it may appear that we're moving slowly, but the risk of making an error is just way too high. I want to shift focus a little bit now to discuss the Bpo sector. In the last set of measures, we announced the closure of the business process outsourcing industry operations in Jamaica. Well, that's not an accurate statement. We didn't close the operations, we closed some of the facilities, because many BPO operators were already operating outside of their facilities, meaning that they had moved some of their workers to work from home or work from other sites. And many of them have taken measures to ensure that operations within a closed, high density, high concentration area, that those measures would mitigate the risk of spread. But the point of fact is that now we have to put in place measures to inspect, and we have to increase the standards. So I had appointed Minister Vaz to pull together a special task force to have a thorough inspection of the BPOs, to set the standards and to ensure that there is not another repeat in this very critical industry that is a major foreign exchange earner for Jamaica, and more than that, a major employer for Jamaica. Minister Vaz.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and those viewing the press conference. Let me first of all give my own heartfelt condolences to the family of Jody and Ferron. It is a devastating event that took place. I also want to commend the Ministry of Health and their entire team. After working with them for the last few days, I realized that they are working miracles with limited resources, and we ask for their continued good health. On April 14th, the Disaster Risk Management Enforcement Measures Number 3, Order 2020, was issued, locking down the entire parish of St. Catharine and all BPO operations in the parish as a result of the outbreak of COVID-19 at the Alarica BPO facility in Portmore, St. Catharine. That facility is now the epicenter of the outbreak on the island. As of Saturday, the 25th of April 2020, Jamaica had 305 confirmed cases, of which 167, or 55% of those cases, were linked directly to employees of Alarica. As of April 23rd, 2020, all BPO operations on the island were ordered closed for 14 days as part of the measures aimed at containing the spread of the COVID-19 in Jamaica. However, exemptions were provided for specific BPOs on the critical service they provide. As Prime Minister said, a task force was asked, for which he asked me to head, was put in place, and members of that task force are the Ministry of Health and Wellness, the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, Jamaica Special Economic Zone, Jamaica Fire Brigade, National Environment and Planning Agency, Ministry of Labor and Social Security, Ministry of National Security, all the municipal councils that are involved that have BPOs operating in their jurisdiction, Jamaica Constabulary Force, Jamaica Defense Force, and the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. As the Prime Minister mentioned, the economic importance of the sector is reflected in the fact that the global BPO market size is expected to reach $405 billion by 2027. And therefore, Jamaica is taking advantage of that and has been doing so. The measures in the Disaster Risk Management Enforcement Notice number 4 are not designed to close down BPO operations. Rather, it is a measure designed to break any potential transmission of the virus that may be taking place in those operations for which the government are unaware. Ensure that all operators are implementing preventative and control measures in their operations, and give the regulatory bodies an opportunity to thoroughly inspect the operations of all BPOs, unified standards as a major focus point. I'm happy to say that we had our first task force meeting last week, Friday, for which the Office of Disaster Preparedness, based on the Local Government Act, is the lead agency, along with the Ministry of Health. And we have come up with inspections and audits protocols, new ones. Self-inspection checklists developed and signed off by all agencies and departments, joint inspection operation plan, the assessment tool developed and circulated for use by the inspection team. The assessment team will be led by the Ministry of Health and Wellness. An inspection of exempted BPO facilities will be done first, followed by those that are closed. Also, geospatial mapping to all BPO locations. Daily reports will be submitted by all BPO operators to the Ministry of Health and Wellness, along with the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management. Also, in relation to security and monitoring, in order to effectively monitor exempted entities and, of course, other BPO entities when they are checked, proposes that all entities will be required to install closed-circuit televisions, and in the case where entities currently have CCTV, that the Jamaica Constabulary Force will be allowed to access such data. And let me just indicate that we are only interested in seeing what's happening in terms of the movement of persons and not the businesses that you are carrying out. And that is a protocol that is being established as we speak with the JCF, Ministry of Health, and most importantly, that today we had a meeting before this press conference with the BPO Association, represented by two persons there, to go through these protocols, to get their input, to make sure that once we start, everybody is on the same page. There were some issues that were raised today, which we are working through, but I don't see a challenge in relation to having a protocol that will be acceptable and followed by all BPOs. So, as we speak, ladies and gentlemen, and viewers, currently, out of a complement of about approximately 40,000 BPO workers, we have working at home a little under 12,000, 11,888 persons. We have approximately 800 persons working remotely in hotels, and we have 9,234 that are exempted based on the Prime Minister's order. So if you take that, we have a little over 20,000 persons that still continue to work in the BPO industry. As of today, the inspections have started by the Ministry of Health and Wellness, including members of the task force, other agencies, and I'm pleased to indicate that based on our meeting today, the Ministry of Health and Office of Disaster Preparedness has assured me that we should be in a position to complete the inspections by Thursday of this week, meaning that all of the exempted BPO operations would be inspected, and of course, whatever needed to be done to make sure that they were in full compliance will be done. And more importantly, those BPOs that are currently closed, which the Prime Minister, as part of the mandate to me, required that we got them reopened within the 14 days, we should have inspected by Monday of next week. That simply means that all the BPO operations in Jamaica should be inspected and signed off on in terms of compliance between now and Monday. And that would mean that out of the 40,000 workers in the BPO industry, that we would have a significant, more than half of those back at work earning again within the 1 week period. So in closing, just to say that the breakdown is 43 BPO operations in St. James, 23 in Kingston and St. Andrew, 2 in St. Catharine, 2 in Manchester, 1 in Hanover, and 1 in St. Elizabeth. So the exempted BPO operations taking place now are 43 BPO companies operating out of 71 locations and 108 BPO operations all island operating out of 154 locations. Let me close by indicating that we are aware of the importance of the BPO industry, but I'd like to say that the government does have a responsibility, and more so a mandate, that the health of the citizenry will always come first. And therefore, I make an appeal to the BPO operators, whether or not you are a member of an association or you are not. We are looking at this as an industry, and we expect everyone to work to make sure that we can protect the lives of our citizens. As the government can only do the inspections from time to time, the onus must be on those operating to act responsibly in the interest of their employees and the wider Jamaica. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, Minister Vaz. I wanted to tie two things together to bring the public deeper into our thinking and consciousness and understanding, and to get a better sense of the trade-offs, the difficult trade-offs that present themselves to us in managing this crisis. We developed the protocols over 2 weeks ago. In fact, we were ready to deploy. Then came the outbreak at the workplace. What did that outbreak do? That outbreak generated 1,513 points of contact tracing, meaning that the public health department had to be mobilized to track down, interview, quarantine, isolate, bring to hospitals, shift resources for logistics and transportation, massive redirection of resources that were geared towards another mission-critical event, which was to bring Jamaicans back home. But the redirection and diversion of resources is much more, because if there were to be another outbreak, then we would be literally crippled because of the resources that it would pull. Now, bear in mind that this one outbreak is more than 70% of the total cases for the entire island. This outbreak has some peculiarities to it as well, because many of the persons who have been affected live in what is called multi-generational circumstances. They live with older persons, many of whom have comorbidities. So it is very important that we contain that group. And then St. Catharine is probably our most populous parish. And many of the urban centers are in St. Catharine, and many of them actually, their addresses are in urban centers. So it's very important that we contain it. But I'm raising the point to our Jamaicans overseas and the Jamaicans here, that our personal actions can have a national impact in a time of crisis. And Jamaica, a country with limited resources, we have to be so careful about the decisions that we make and how we manage the crisis. So, having done 1,513 contact tracing points, we still have, as I've said before, 300 more approximately to do. We are trying to phase when those resources will be released so that we can start to throw in now our resources into the repatriation of our Jamaicans, because it is those same public health professionals who are doing the contact tracing who will have to come and be with you in the state quarantine. And more than that, the persons from that workplace outbreak, many of them were quarantined, so those rooms are now no longer available. We have to wait until that quarantine phase is up, then we can bring others in. So I just wanted to bring the nation into the considerations that the government has to balance. Another balance that we have to think about is that every measure that we put in place to slow down movement slows down our economy. Every curfew measure, every stay-at-home measure slows down our economy. It means that people will be out of work and out of a job, out of an income. The hire purchase piles up, the electricity bill piles up, the food bill, you can't meet it, the frustration grows, and then people say the medicine is worse than the illness. So this is the balancing act. We have to figure out how to put in place measures that slow the spread, control the spread, whilst at the same time not doing irreparable damage to our economy. And that is how the government has proceeded. And I think how we have handled the Bpo outbreak in one workplace facility is a good example of the government making sure that we take care of the public health risk and manage the economic fallout at the same time. There is no absolute success in either, but I think that we have found the right mix of measures to ensure that critical business can continue, but the measures to prevent an outbreak are in place. Many persons who would have criticized the government action as being unthinking of the business fallout. And then there are those who would be criticizing the government action as being unconcerned about the public health fallout. The truth is that from either way, you're in a no-win situation. If there were another outbreak, it wouldn't be the government closing the BPOs. The public outcry would be so much that the BPO operators themselves, even those who weren't affected, would have had to close. So it was important that the government stepped in front, showed leadership, and controlled the situation. And I think that is what we have done here today. So I wanted to just make a connection, connect the dots in the minds of the people watching, that we have limited resources. If there is any act that is not in keeping with the general national thrust of controlling this outbreak, this disease, this epidemic, and should there be an outbreak, it could cause a redirection of resources. So it is important that every single Jamaican, every single business, every single employee, every single employer, that we follow the recommended protocols, procedures, guidelines, and orders of the government. If we follow that, if we follow those, I'm certain that we will pull through this and be even stronger as a result of it. I'm going to invite our Minister of Finance to give an overview of the economic situation. But as he comes to the podium, I want to announce that for the past 2 weeks, the Cabinet has been focusing on planning our economic recovery. I must say that the Jamaican private sector has been an outstanding partner from the start in providing support and resources to government effort, but even to their own effort to provide care packages and other forms of support to the Jamaican people. And they have been very forthcoming in wanting to be a part of the national recovery planning. Last week, I had a discussion with the Partnership for Jamaica, the National Partnership Mechanism, and they too have said that they would want to play a critical role. So today, the Cabinet has decided to put that mechanism together, and we will have on that what we call the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Task Force. Just to be clear, this is not a talk shop. All of the task forces that I've put in place, they have not been talk shops. This is about the nuts and bolts, putting in place the logistics. Yes, there will always be some high-level thinking, some sandboxing, as they call it, but at the same time, it's about getting to the nitty-gritty of the subject. So it's not a body for grandstanding and a whole lot of talk. This is about action. Just as how we put in place the task force to develop the protocol, which we did in record speed, including developing a website and an app, which those people who know about that, is very complicated to do, but we got it done within a matter of weeks. We have put in the coordination for philanthropy and volunteerism, and that has worked very well. The task force for the BPO, that has worked very well, plus other task force that we have put in. Now, we are going to be shifting some attention to the economic recovery. So let me announce that the task force will be chaired by the Minister of Finance, Dr. the Honorable Nigel Clark. On that task force as well will be Minister Audley Shaw, Minister Edmund Bartlett, Minister Darrell Vaz, Minister Favour Williams. We have invited Professor Gordon Shirley from the Port Authority, Ivan Anderson from NROC, Mr. Keith Duncan, President of the PSOJ, Lloyd Distant, President of the JCC, Mr. Richard Pandui, President of the JMEA, Mr. Omar Robinson, President of the JHTA, Mr. Donovan Wignall, President of the MSME Alliance, Eileen Davis White, President of the Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions, Mr. Lenworth Fulton, President of the Jamaica Agricultural Society, Gloria Henry, President of the Business Process Industry Association of Jamaica, Mr. Joe Matalon, past President of the PSOJ, Mr. Chris Zaka, past President of the PSOJ, Mr. William Mafood, past President of the PSOJ, Nadine Spence, who is a gender activist, Mr. Adam Stewart, a hotelier, Mr. John Biles, tourism attraction operator, and Professor Alwyn Wint, who is a part of the national partnership mechanism. There would be other opportunities as well for persons who would want to serve to indicate, and we will consider. All of this, of course, has to be done in conjunction with the Ministry of Health, because all the economic activities that we are going to do should be viewed through the prism of the Ministry of Health. So I want to invite Dr. Clark to come and give us an overview of the economic situation. Dr. Clark.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The COVID Economic Recovery Task Force is a multi-stakeholder task force drawn from persons from a diverse sectoral background, private sector, civil society, academia, and from the public sector. working with such a diverse group, I'm highly confident that we will be able to put together the contours around Jamaica's economic recovery in this time of the COVID pandemic. Now, as the Prime Minister has mentioned, the COVID pandemic has, on one hand, health impacts and health implications, and on the other, the measures taken to slow the spread of the virus have an economic impact, an economic component. We want to make sure that in all the decisions that are made, we don't allow measures that are targeted towards significant but temporary health crisis to have long-term or permanent economic damage. We want to ensure that we can always recover economically, even though we take a pause for the moment in order to deal with the health effect of the crisis. We also want to make sure, in addition to ensuring that we don't have permanent or long-term economic damage from the crisis, we want to position ourselves to be able to take advantage of the opportunities that a post-COVID-19 global economy offers, as well as to ensure that we take account of the realities of post-COVID-19. By way of example, far too many Jamaicans do not possess national identification. Far too many Jamaicans do not possess a bank account, and far too many Jamaicans do not have access to the internet. We have made substantial progress, and I know the Jamaica Survey of Living Conditions charts the progress that we've made in respect of internet access, and Minister Williams can tell you more about that. We were at 34% in 2016. It increased to 54% in 2017, and the 2018 numbers are being prepared as we speak. But having said that, lack of access to identification and lack of access to bank accounts and lack of access to the internet slows our economy down and does not allow us to move to higher levels of productivity. By way of example, the tax office, which falls within my ministry, has to interface with the public. And there are over 20 tax types that you can pay online, from motor vehicle certificate to your property taxes, GCT, PAYE, statutory deductions, corporate income tax, and many other tax types, including trade licenses and so forth. Yet, even though that facility exists for those taxes to be paid online, the Tax Administration in Jamaica just released numbers today that say, and you can see that with your own eyes from the crowds that we have seen at the tax offices over the past few weeks, that 80% of the business that Jamaicans, residents, citizens go to the tax office to transact and to conduct, 80% of that business could be done online. In other words, we could reduce the congestion at our tax offices down to 20% of what it is today by persons taking advantage of the opportunity to use the online facilities. But that remains a pipe dream as long as persons don't have identification, don't have a bank account, and don't have internet access. Because to pay online, just to use a tax office as a simple example, to pay online, you're going to need a bank account. To get a bank account, you're going to need national identification. And once you have both, you're going to need internet access. So we see, and as the Prime Minister has mentioned before, we see that the triangulation of these three issues are going to be key to improving and increasing the productivity of our society. The more that we can transact business with the government and business and commerce in general from the convenience of a mobile phone or the convenience of an iPad or computer for those who have those devices, the more time will be available to be spent on more productive activities, thereby producing more per unit time. And fundamentally, that's what economic growth is about. It's about improving the productivity of labor and the productivity of capital in our society. And triangulating around these three core issues, we believe is going to be central in a COVID environment and as we emerge into our post-COVID future. Now, the crisis is manifesting itself economically through a demand shock and a supply shock. And I've said that before in an interview I gave a few weeks ago. A demand shock in the sense that economic activity has been curtailed, people have lost their jobs, and therefore economic demand, aggregate demand, has fallen off significantly. At the same time, we have a supply shock in that the supply of goods and services is limited by measures that have been put in place to slow the spread of the coronavirus. So even for whatever demand exists, the barbershop cannot supply services because the barbershop is not open. The bar cannot provide services because the bar is not open. The hotel is there, the plant exists, the rooms exist, the swimming pool and the sea are there, but leisure services cannot be provided because of measures to contain the spread of the coronavirus. So it's a very unusual set of circumstances to have at the same time a demand shock and a supply shock. Another way to look at the manifestation of this crisis in economic terms is to examine the channels through which it is affecting us. And one can look at the channels in three ways, or three distinct channels through which this crisis is affecting us economically. The first channel we mentioned earlier is that economic activity has slowed down. There is, as people stay home and don't go out, stay home due to curfews, or stay home because activities or the opportunity to transact business outside is limited, it means that economic activity is less and less day by day and week by week, which has implications and repercussions. The other channel through which we are being affected is that unemployment has been growing over the past few weeks. In just 4 weeks, or rather March 10th, in 6 weeks since our first case of COVID-19 was confirmed, we've had tens and tens of thousands of Jamaicans who unfortunately have been laid off and in some cases terminated. And the third channel through which it is affecting us is through a decline in foreign exchange inflows. Our primary sources of foreign exchange are first tourism, then remittances, and thirdly, through BPO activities. And of course, we need foreign exchange in order to conduct our daily activities, to buy commodities that are precious and essential, to buy and import food, and to conduct life as we know it. Now, I just want to spend a little time on the channel of unemployment. And in other briefings, we can talk about the other channels through which we are being affected. The government of Jamaica set up the CARE program, and we have the set cash component where persons who have been laid off can apply for temporary assistance over the next few months. And the data provided by those applications is quite instructive and gives us a real-time assessment of what is transpiring in the economy. As I mentioned moments ago, we have tens and tens of thousands. We have over 60,000 CARE set cash applications. The vast majority of those are for persons who work in the formal sector. And we are seeing that the job losses, the layoffs, are occurring in a number of sectors and subsectors. We're seeing substantial job losses in the airline industry, which should not be a surprise, in the aviation industry, i.e. the businesses that service airlines, whether they be catering companies or companies that provide other mechanical and other services or ground services to airlines. We're seeing significant job losses and layoffs in the hotel sector, which itself employs directly tens and tens of thousands of persons, bartenders and waiters, room attendants, and persons who work on landscapes of hotels. We're seeing a lot of layoffs in the security industry, and in particular for the contracts that security companies have with airports and the contracts they have with hotels and attractions and tour companies. We're seeing significant claims for unemployment benefits from persons who work in attraction companies, in tour companies, in ground transportation companies. We're also seeing increasingly in entertainment, persons involved in the entertainment industry, both on the North Coast and entertainment in general, as well as persons who work in the restaurant business and in the fast food businesses. Several fast food businesses have, what we see is there's a data of the applications coming in from that sector. And we're also seeing some amount in the retail sector and some amount in manufacturing. And in addition, the early childhood sector and those involved in private education at the prep level, we're seeing where some enterprises have resorted to laying off temporarily as schools remain out. Now, as the Prime Minister mentioned, these are all Jamaican citizens who play their part in making our country function. These are human beings and these are livelihoods. And we have to be as concerned about these livelihoods as we are concerned about protecting lives from the health perspective. The data from the Set Cash online application suggests that the vast majority of these are young persons. Over 75% are under the age of 40. They're starting out in life, they have obligations, hire purchase obligations, rent obligations, mortgage obligations. They have internet services in some cases. They have to purchase food, medical supplies. They may have obligations to microfinance companies or even financial institutions. And we, through the Economic Recovery Task Force, our job is going to be to do all that we can, working with other sectors in the society to ensure that we have the best chance for a recovery of all the jobs that we have that have been temporarily laid off or have been terminated, that we can have a restoration of economic activity that can allow persons to resume the lives that they have lived. We know that in some instances, these job losses affect households not once but twice. In some instances along the North Coast and in Westmoreland, and Hanover, in the tourist belt of Jamaica, Port Antonio, that their families where not one but possibly two persons have been laid off. And these are facts that we take very seriously, and we empathize with the experiences that our fellow Jamaicans are having. As you know, we have taken great pride in the employment data and in the increase in employment over the past few years. Indeed, Jamaica experienced a record unemployment as measured in October 2019, and I believe in January of 2020, unemployment was also quite low in the region of 7 point something percent. And so it's incredibly painful knowing where we have come from. Unemployment just a few years ago was 16 or 17%. And over time, through pursuing economic policies that are favorable to investment, favorable to expansion, and favorable to employment growth, we have seen over 100,000 jobs created between 2016 and up to January of 2020. So it is very painful to see that progress be interrupted in this way. Progress that we have all taken great pride in. Progress that has allowed people to expand their horizons and to take advantage of opportunities that they could not have taken advantage of before. But we want you to know that in addition to the temporary cash transfer measures that have been put in place to alleviate this economic pain that tens of thousands of our fellow Jamaicans are experiencing at this time, we will be working assiduously to ensure that this is a temporary experience and that Jamaica can bounce back and can have an economic recovery where all of these jobs are restored. Now, just an update on the CARE program, which was put in place for exactly these circumstances. The government of Jamaica's CARE program has a critical social mission of alleviating the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on Jamaicans. Since we announced the CARE program on the 24th of March in the closing budget presentation, and 2 weeks later, on April the 9th, I believe, or 2.5 weeks later, on April the 9th, applications for the CARE program were opened, and we have over 500, or applications on behalf of approximately 500,000 Jamaicans. This makes the CARE program the largest and the broadest social intervention program in Jamaica's history. Since Friday, April 24th, that is Friday just gone, the government has been engaged in the verification and processing of these applications. And that verification process involves establishing the eligibility of each applicant for the CARE product that they applied for, and also verifying that the bank account that exists is an eligible bank account. Since Friday, approximately 350,000 confirmations of eligibility have been sent by computer-generated text message to the mobile phones of applicants for the compassionate grant. Those applicants can expect to receive their grant over the coming days, and another text message will be sent automatically computer-generated when those grants have been paid over to financial institutions that they have, that the applicants would have submitted. For the compassionate grants, we are going to want to make sure, and for all grants, for all applications to the CARE program, we want to make sure that the bank accounts that have been submitted are verifiable bank accounts, i.e. the bank account is in the name of the applicant for the CARE product. Where there's a difference between the name of the applicant and the name of the bank account that has been submitted, there'll be a computer-generated text message that advises the applicant that a discrepancy exists, and the applicant will be able to log on through the wecare.gov.jm website with their TRN and their application number, and you'll be able to update your financial institution information. The eligibility for the compassionate grant also seeks to establish that the applicant's TRN does not appear on any current employee database in the possession of Tax Administration Jamaica. So when I say that 350,000 persons have received text messages for the compassionate grant, and recall there were just about 390,000 applications. What it means is that for those 350,000, the automatic processing has established that their TRNs do not appear on any current payroll database that in the possession of Taxation Jamaica. But as payment is going to be effected, it's going to be important that the bank account information is also up to date. Now, of the 500,000 applications that I mentioned earlier, 60,000 were for set cash grants. And those set cash grants are being processed as we speak. For an individual to be eligible for payment of a set cash grant, the former employer who effected the layoff or the termination will have to upload a P45 form to the website of Tax Administration Jamaica. That P45 form will evidence that the applicant indeed was employed prior to the 10th of March and the applicant has been terminated after the 10th of March. Where a P45 form does not exist for a particular applicant or a particular TRN, that applicant will be advised by computer-generated text that the P45 has not been uploaded and will encourage the applicant to be in touch with their employer. The CARE program will also be in touch with employers across all the sectors that I mentioned, hotels, attraction, aviation, ground transportation, tours, restaurants, fast foods, manufacturing, retail, etc., the early childhood education institutions, to ensure that employers upload the P45 form. But please understand that without that form being uploaded, the government is unable to enact a transfer of the grant because the verification is necessary. These are taxpayer funds, and there has to be an audit trail that establishes that the applicant indeed was employed and has been terminated. There are other products under the CARE program, which include the general grant, the small business grant, the tourism grant, and the best cash product for employers. We are focusing on processing the 450,000 compassionate and care grants, which account for approximately 90% of all applications. And then, after that, which will be in early May, turn our attention to processing the general grants, the small business grants, the tourism-related grants, and the best cash grants. And we will do so as speedily as possible. There have been some who have been trying to apply from overseas. The CARE program was designed in such a way, while for the JamCovid app, it's meant for persons who might be here or also persons who are overseas. For the CARE product, which is meant to alleviate the economic circumstances of persons resident in Jamaica, it is not accessible overseas. But that also protects us from those who would have nefarious intent, who live all around the world and would see a program such as this as something to try and attack using cyber tools. So the way in which the CARE application has been designed, it has been designed in such a way not to be accessible from outside of Jamaica. So again, this CARE program is put in place to alleviate the circumstances that persons are facing in light of the COVID pandemic. And as the payment is made over the next several days, and again, you'll be alerted by text message when the payment has been made. And later on this week, we will be announcing protocols for those who need to collect payment. It would be inconsistent with social distance and health protocols if all recipients of CARE grants were to descend on financial institutions or remittance companies all at once. It would defeat the purpose of what we are trying to do. And therefore, we will announce sort of protocols for collection from remittance companies, and where we would ask people to observe those protocols, to go on the day that accords with their last name and at the time. But we'll announce those over the next few days as the consultation, in particular with the remittance companies, continues. So we want to ensure that we have this temporary cash transfer program in place to alleviate the experiences of many Jamaicans, but at the same time, to not leave it at that. We also have to turn our attention to the economic recovery over the medium term, and that has to be, the planning for which has to begin now, to ensure that we can gradually revive economic activity in all of the affected sectors. And by reviving economic activity, we can restore the jobs that have been temporarily lost. Now, just giving an update on Jamaica's application to access the rapid financing instrument from the IMF. We expect that application to be considered in a few weeks, and for Jamaica, for disbursement to be made right after that. We are actually entertaining missions from the fund at this point, virtually, of course, and the discussions are underway, and we expect our application for access to the rapid financing instrument to be before the board of the IMF very shortly, in a matter of weeks. I would have received a response to the letter, which I shared with the public, that was sent to the managing director of the IMF, and received a very favorable response that alludes to Jamaica's strong and long track record that favorably disposes the fund to attend to our request expeditiously. We are also looking at the products that are on offer from other multilaterals, such as the Caribbean Development Bank, which is our own Caribbean Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and the World Bank. While we may not need the financing on the fiscal side, the resources from these institutions, come in the form of foreign exchange resources, and those resources can be used to supplement and to augment the supply of reserves that we have here in Jamaica. Obviously, these resources from these multilateral institutions come with, they have different products that suit different circumstances. So we're carefully reviewing all of those, and as if we make any affirmative decisions, we'll update the country. But just want to communicate that we have options that we are considering that can increase our supply and inflows of foreign exchange even beyond what the rapid financing instrument is likely to bring. And then finally, Prime Minister, just to update that we intend to table a supplementary budget in 2 to 3 weeks, and that supplementary budget will recast revenues in light of the COVID pandemic, and will also involve a reallocation of expenditure to be consistent with the realities that we face at this time, and will ensure that the expenditure that we intend to enact for the CARE program, goes to the House of Parliament. You'll recall that in my closing budget presentation, we'd have carved out the space for that expenditure, even though the expenditure itself would not yet have been, going through the parliamentary process. The supplementary will take care of that, and it will also allow us to recast our revenues in light of the pandemic, and also to reallocate expenditure as will be necessary. In my closing budget presentation, I would have given an indication of an earlier supplementary budget, but as conditions or as time went on, it became clearer that it would be highly useful to have at least 1 month of revenue data under the COVID circumstances before we tried to recast 12 months of data. So by the time we table the supplementary, we should have preliminary estimates of revenues for April during this COVID period where we've had curfews and we have had, closures of certain businesses and lockdowns or partial lockdowns of parishes. It's important to see the revenue outturn under those circumstances, and that will give a very good indication, or give some indication rather, of how the remaining 11 months of the fiscal year are likely to transpire. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Minister. I'm sure you'll agree that this press briefing was very comprehensive. There can be no complaints about the provision of information to the public. So the next press conference, Minister Clark will start first. Naomi, if you have members of the media who would like to ask questions.
All right, thank you, sir. There are several from our media partners on Zoom, and I believe they'll make theirs even as comprehensive. Let's start off with Brittany Clark from Nationwide Radio. All the guidelines have already been explained, so we just go straight to them. Brittany?
Okay, hello, good evening, Mr. Prime Minister and other members. I have 2 questions. Firstly, is there an update on the health status of the deportees who were brought into the island last week? Are any of them displaying symptoms of COVID-19, and have any of them been tested? And the other question is, what is the protocol for treating with pregnant women or even women in labor who present to the hospitals with COVID-19 symptoms?
Very good questions. I'll invite the Minister of Health to join me, but just to say that as it relates to our obligations, that Jamaica has ensured that we make a balance. We keep our obligations, but at the same time, we must protect the health of our citizens. And in that regard, we have insisted on ensuring that anyone who we take into the island, we test them. And so all the persons who have been deported to Jamaica, they have been tested and they have been placed in quarantine. My information is that one has tested positive. I'll ask the Minister of Health to answer your other question about the protocols for pregnant women.
Prime Minister, if I crave your indulgence to ask Dr. Webster Carr, the epidemiologist, to speak about the protocols for pregnant women. She is a clinician in the room, and she'll be better able to explain quickly. But yes, to confirm that one of the deportees tested positive. We're still awaiting some additional information on the others. As soon as we have that information, we will provide it. In the meantime, the protocols would chip in once we have a positive case, and that is being followed through as we speak.
So this standard of care for all patients, whether pregnant or not, remain the same. So all patients will receive the care that is needed. So the standard of care changed a little bit because of COVID-19, as would for any infectious disease, but the standard of care is very clear. All patients receive what they need to treat their particular condition.
Thank you so much, Dr. Webster Carr. Let's then move now to Ms. Kate Choppel. I believe she's from 18 Degrees North. Kate? Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening. Thank you for taking my question. You said
Could you speak up for us, Kate? We're not hearing you very clearly. Could you speak up, please?
Yes, one of the deportees has tested positive, you said. What protocols are you taking to ensure that it isn't spread, and where are they being quarantined?
Well, they're being quarantined in Kingston, but I won't give any specific locations. That poses a security risk, and that would be in violation of our orders. We have within our orders specified that the identity and privacy of persons who are being tested or have tested positive or are going on any treatment related to this COVID issue, that has to be kept confidential and private. So I couldn't in any way reveal any detail that would give any location as to where they are being kept.
Thank you, sir. Let's move on
and
to...
in terms of what we're doing, the standard protocols are in place. I'm certain they are being quarantined and they have their individual facilities in terms of bathroom and beds and so forth. So they are being quarantined in facilities dedicated to them.
Thank you, sir. Let's go
As is the case for all quarantine.
All right, let's go over to Dion Jackson-Miller, RJR.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Still on the issue of protocols, Andrews Hospital very early on said that they would not be treating COVID-19 patients. The Minister of Health had said there would be discussions taking place with the hospital. Coming out of those discussions, we heard that Andrews would take overflow non-COVID patients from the public hospitals. My question is, did the Ministry of Health ensure that private hospitals, including Andrews, had protocols in place in case COVID-19 patients or suspected COVID-19 patients were brought in for any reason? Second, can you tell us at this time the plans for PEP for grades 4, 5, and 6? What is being cancelled? What is being adjourned? And still on education, CXC says the decision on CAPE and CSEC will be made by the governments. What is Jamaica's position on whether a July sitting should go ahead based on SBA and paper 1? And when is there going to be a meeting of the heads to make a decision?
The question on education is an excellent question. The Cabinet, the first submission we took this morning was on that. However, Dion, could I ask that I answer that question at my next press conference instead of this one? Because we do intend to have a press conference dedicated to what we call the human resource recovery. And so we didn't complete the discussion, and so I don't want to speak out of not completing the discussion and the decision. So I ask you if I will note the question and provide you with an answer for the next press conference, which depending on what happens during the week, could be Friday. I'll ask the Minister of Health to come up and give you the answers regarding the health questions that you asked. Thank you for your understanding, Dion.
Quickly, Prime Minister and colleagues, we did enter into an agreement with Andrews Hospital, Andrews Memorial Hospital. As you know, it's a private entity where they initially had indicated that they would not be able to participate in the treatment of COVID patients. We had a negotiation, had an agreement for them to be an extension of the Kingston Public Hospital. Those discussions included giving them critical support in a number of ways. I'll ask our epidemiologist to speak more definitively to that, but I am certain that that included also providing the appropriate levels of supporting infrastructure or equipment, protective gear, as part of the arrangements. It is true, however, though, that the agreement that we struck with them was for them to deal with an extension of KPH, which meant holding non-COVID patients. I don't want to get into the specifics, and I hope you appreciate, of the situation until I get the particular report, because it may prejudice any investigation that is going to take place or any other matter that may come up that are around this particular situation. So I'd prefer not to give too much of my own opinions based on what I've seen so far and heard, only to say we're dealing with a hospital with doctors who are trained to conduct particular affairs. And as far as we're concerned, certain protocols are standard and in this case, I believe should have applied.
Thank you, Minister. There's really not much more to add, but it is a matter of standard of care. We did provide some level of protective gear and a little bit of training, but the doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals are professionals and would give the standard of care that is necessary for the patient. Thank you.
Question, though, is whether the ministry ensured or satisfied itself that the private hospitals, including Andrews, had adequate protocols in place in case COVID-19 patients were brought in.
So all public and private institutions will be governed by the protocols that have been put in place. There is a standard of surveillance that occurs at public and private hospitals, including Andrews and the others. That is a weekly activity, and it is monitored by the Public Health Department.
I'm sorry, the Minister of Health is coming back.
I just want to be very clear on this issue because I think it's important. When the issue of COVID became a major health threat, there were a number of private practices, meaning medical practices, that had closed their doors, essentially, and refused to treat patients generally because of the fear of the disease and the potential for self-contamination. We made quite a bit of effort as a Ministry of Health to reach out through the associations, the Medical Doctors Association, to encourage, to provide information. I have certainly been on several Zoom meetings with literally hundreds of practitioners, many of them private practitioners, many of them working in our hospitals, private hospitals, in some cases in the public hospitals, but also having their private practices. And you may recall also where we handed over personal protective equipment, N95 masks in particular, to the umbrella body of the Medical Doctors Association as part of our efforts to engage them, to provide information and to provide support, because we have always maintained that without the private sector, it would be very difficult to overcome this challenge. Indeed, finally, we have announced and have placed in the media an expression of interest for partnerships with medical doctors, having taken the decision that as part of this strategy to manage vulnerable groups, and in particular hypertensive and diabetic patients, some 75,000 of them who attend for care in the public health system, we would outsource them to private practitioners, private doctors, as part of managing the risks associated with gatherings in our health centers. So I don't want us to misunderstand. We have engaged and have been engaging the private sector, the medical private sector at all levels, and have provided them with not just information, but also with support as it relates to dealing with this COVID matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, let's go now to Damian Mitchell at the Gleaner. Go ahead, Damian.
Thank you very much, Naomi. Prime Minister, can you indicate, or probably the Health Minister, who exactly is leading the investigation into the Jody and Farron incident, and exactly what does the process entail? That's question one. And two, will the government admit that there is a backlog in the testing of collected samples? If not, how do you explain the reported complaints of patients who have been waiting in one case for 10 days, in another case for 14 days, and in the third case, 1 full week for the test result of a 70-year-old man who died at the Mandeville Regional Hospital? We gather that result is now negative.
While the minister comes, you would recognize that there are many dimensions of this case that would have to be investigated, and there are several jurisdictions that would automatically come into play. You would have already heard that the police have started their own investigation to see if there's criminal negligence. There would be the administrative process, which I suspect the minister will speak to. And then there is a public interest part of it, which the government has to look at very carefully. As the minister said, we have to make sure that whatever we do, it does not prejudice any other action that any other interested party may want to take. So the minister will come and explain certainly the administrative investigations that will go on.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Yes, we have started a process by asking for an internal report on the matter. And as I said earlier, when we started earlier this evening, that the complication of the scenario or situation was made more so because it involves several institutions. And so you have the University Hospital of the West Indies, the Spanish Town Hospital, the Victoria Jubilee Hospital, and of course the Andrews Memorial Hospital. So those reports have been submitted. I've actually seen a draft report, but I don't comment on draft reports. And as I said earlier, by tomorrow, we will have a better handle on the situation. I'll certainly advise the Honorable Prime Minister, and we shouldn't be able to make a more definitive statement. So I'm not prepared to give answers to those questions in specific details at this time until we're seized with the information, because it's a delicate situation. On the issue of testing, yes, we did have a backlog, which we have spoken about. We had, I think, 600 samples that were to be tested. Since last week, however, when we installed the new system at the National Public Health Lab, we have been clearing up that backlog very nicely. And indeed, I believe after another day or so, we should be very current in terms of the numbers of testing that takes place each day. You may recall that we were doing between 90 and just over 100 tests per day at the National Influenza Center. Since we started with the new facility at the National Public Health Lab, we're doing 300 to 400 per day. We can do more, but we're slowly ramping up to ensure that the machine and the personnel who mans the machine, a brand new machine, high technology equipment, that they have the best possible understanding before they go to the full throttle. So we'll clear up the backlog in a very short space of time.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, Shannon Dale, he is from Cool 97, is next, but just a question that I see popping up, especially those in the diaspora. If people coming in will be tested for COVID-19 when they go to quarantine facility, does that mean that they'll spend less time, fewer than the 14 days, if their test is negative?
No, the protocol that is established now on the scientific advice of our public health officials, and indeed considering our local circumstances as well, both with resource availability and potential risk, that the standard quarantine cycle of 14 days be established, and that if persons are allowed to return, that they are quarantined in a government-designated facility. So that should answer that you would spend 14 days in a government facility. We have considered other protocols, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs had mentioned, but we are not yet in a position where that could be finalized and implemented, because there are other considerations in having, for example, home quarantine. There's a different level of risk associated with home quarantine as against a government-operated facility quarantine.
Thank you, sir. Shannon Dale? I'm sorry, you're Yes, go ahead now.
Cool 97 FM and My Jamaica Today. Just want to get some clarification as it relates to the amount of medical doctors who are now in Jamaica, who went away to study, and they have decided, well, it is decided that they won't be doing the second tests relating to the Caribbean examination of the Medical Association. Just wanted to know if those persons will be allowed to practice understanding the increase of cases that we currently have. Will we allow them to step in the hospitals and help the doctors that we currently have in the hospitals? And I'm told that it's roughly over 100 of them right now in Jamaica who are not being allowed to do the test. And the test was actually put off 3 times.
Thank you, Shannon.
That's a very specific question. I'm going to give the Minister of Health some time to consult with his technical persons.
Right.
Valid question, but very technical, very specific. It's not the kind of information that we would have here with us, but we'll find it and let the public know, and you as well.
Until
Thank
then,
you very much for that question.
Thank you. Until then, let's move to Michael Sharp at JNN. Michael? I'm sorry, could you unmute your...
Foreign exchange.
Okay, could you begin again, Michael? My apologies.
The rapid fire instrument, how much exactly are we expecting to get from that? What is the situation with the remittances in Jamaica and the fall off because of COVID-19? And of course, what is the foreign exchange situation? We see the dollar moving in a certain direction.
Well, I'm certain you have asked that question of Minister Clark. So,
yes.
So, Minister Clark, if you want to come and give Michael answers to those questions.
Just the first part of your question with respect to the RFI request for the IMF. The RFI, one can access up to 100% of quota, which is IMF speak, so to speak. The executive board makes a decision on whether you go to the maximum 100% of quota or not. So it would be presumptuous of me to say exactly how much Jamaica is going to access under it. But suffice to say, it would be up to approximately 500 million, some number up to that or slightly above. With respect to your question on remittances, the early data, and I was just looking at an update that I got last week. I'm getting, get the information on a weekly basis. Over the past, since the first incidence of COVID-19 for the 6 weeks from then until last week, remittances are on average 15% lower than they were for the corresponding 6 weeks of last year. In some weeks it has been lower than that, in other weeks it has been higher or better than that, but in aggregate over the 6 weeks it has been 15% lower. I think that, oh right, your third question, you've heard me speak about that many times before, which is that we operate a flexible exchange rate that responds to demand and supply at any point in time. We have over, approximately $3.5 billion in the central bank. We have could be another several hundred million more coming, could be as much as 500 million coming. We have access to funding from the IDB, from the World Bank, from the CDB, that could total, even more. So there's no, in terms of the fundamentals at stake, there's no need for concern. There will be movement up and down that reflects supply and demand. And now is certainly the time that you want those forces to sort of moderate and rationalize allocations and not to use the citizens' resources. The reserves in the central bank belong to everybody, not just to the people transacting on a particular day. Remember, there's 3 million of us. The number of people transacting on a particular day is a very small percentage of all of us. So, I've spoken at length about how that, works. And I think I think we're seeing a manifestation of what I would have spent the last 2 years talking about, that you want to keep your reserves for a genuine rainy day and not to use your reserves in October 2019 and July of 2018 or whatever in response to a temporary imbalance between demand and supply. If we had done that, the extra $100 million that we'd have spent 6 months ago when eruption of voices calling, that would be $100 million less that we would have for a genuine crisis like now when inflows have dried up. So I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you, Minister Clark. Prime Minister, our final question will come from Edmund Campbell from The Gleaner. Just ahead of Edmund getting on, just clarifying for persons on social media in St. Catharine in particular, concerning what you had announced regarding the extension. Their contemplation is that it would have ended, the original order would have ended the 29th, so where does the 3 days end them up?
All right, well, let me just be sure about the dates. I'll answer that and close off with St. Catharine. And I will ask Edmund to ask his questions.
Edmund, go ahead.
Are you ready now?
Yes, go ahead, Edmund.
Okay, does the government harbor any apprehension that its posture regarding economic recovery mode might threaten the perceived gains of limiting COVID-19 spread and give the impression that the country might be past the worst? And the second question is, provide for us, Prime Minister, an update on the Alorica investigation into alleged breaches of the Disaster Risk Management Act.
Two very good questions, Edmund. The first question that you had asked was, are we moving to rescue the economy, and that move threatens the potential gains that we have made in the fight against COVID? The short answer is no. And as we have other press conferences, you will start to see the unfolding of our strategy. I will just say this so that the entire Jamaica appreciates where we are. We started out by preventing the virus from coming to Jamaica. We took measures to do that, and we did very well. When it got here on the 10th of March, we took measures to contain it, and we did very well. We lasted for almost 5 weeks, more than most countries in the region, and kept the spread very low, the rate of infection very low. But as I've always said, there will be a spike from day one. We know that this would happen. That it happened at a particular workplace facility. It's just the nature of the virus. And it will happen again at others. The objective of the government strategy is to increase public awareness to every single Jamaican to recognize that the spread of the virus, the control of the spread is in your hands. That's number one. Number two, the government's role, aside from empowering you with information, is to put in place measures that will, as quickly as possible, protect you by slowing the spread. And whilst we are doing that, we are increasing the capacity of the health system to treat you and to respond to any surge in the spread of the virus. We are at that point where I believe we now have sufficient information. We have put in place the resources to manage any surge within limit. We are being challenged now by panic and fear, which is resulting in the creation of a stigma and which is impacting on how we respond. And what we will have to do as a government now is to increase our information and education around the disease, to destigmatize the disease, so that public response, whether it is from the average man on the street or from a health professional, does not compromise the national response. So we are now in that phase where we are trying to manage the public education of it, but we are also at a phase where the economic considerations, not just on the government, right? It is not just Minister Clark, the Minister of Finance. It is, Juliet Holness, the Minister of Finance of my house, and your spouses and so forth, who are feeling the impact of the crisis and therefore making decisions that may not always align with what the government is saying to do. So the government's message is stay at home, work from home. Not many people can actually do that. And so people will start to make decisions. So the government has to craft a policy that accepts that people must survive, and it is in their ability to survive that they will be strengthened to follow the protocols. And at the same time, we must increase the capacity of the health sector and ensure that between the measures to control movement and the measures for your personal hygiene practices and the measures for the contact tracing, that we also put in place measures to make sure that you can earn a little income, buy some food, take care of your family. So it is comprehensive, comprehensive. We care about you in every single way.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I know the Minister of Foreign Affairs just needed to make a quick intervention ahead of us wrapping up, as well as Damian Mitchell had indicated that he had a quick follow-up during the time I was just seeing it. So we'll just allow him to do that quick follow-up. And Minister, you can go ahead as well on the podium. Damian, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Naomi. I just wanted to be clear that the health minister was saying he would not indicate who is leading the probe into the Jodian Ferran incident. And while you're at it, Minister, can you say whether any other health worker has tested positive since your last report a couple of days ago?
No, I think the minister is coming to join me, but I think he said that he wouldn't discuss the preliminary report, the draft report.
So thank you, Prime Minister. So in the case of the report that I've asked for, I've asked the most senior two technocrats in the ministry, the permanent secretary and the chief medical officer, to conduct the initial report on what transpired. They lead the ministry, one in the clinical area, of course, one in the administrative area, and they will generate a report based on the reports that they would have requested from the respective hospitals. Coming out of that, which I hope to review tomorrow, clearly I'll brief the Honorable Prime Minister, and a decision would be made in terms of where to go from there. But we're certainly aware of the urgency of the situation and that it needs a certain level of probity and transparency, and that will be reflected in our pronouncements after I see the report that was asked for.
There was a question asked about the investigations into the BPO. Resources have already been mobilized, as I've said, in the task force to do the various inspections. So that will be done, and a report will be generated from that. But we have also mobilized other resources to look at the management of the facility to see if there was anything in terms of negligence as it relates to the faithful execution, which we would have expected of the Disaster Risk Management Act.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Just very quickly, to give you the mixed news. The great news is that everyone is excited by the Jam COVID website. We experienced what was probably history in 100,000 hits in 1 second. Probably more hits in a quicker period of time than any other website in Jamaica. The not so good news is that the website perceived it as an attack and shut down to protect itself. Good news again, that it protected itself. But they're adding capacity. The website is up, but the immigration portal is still having capacity added to it. So I just want to not only let you know, persons who are still trying to access the site, to give it a little while, but also to appeal. If you are in the wider community, you traveled a year ago, 2 years ago, you live overseas and are thinking about coming home now, maybe just wait a little while, because the intention of this protocol is to make sure that persons who recently traveled, that traveled before border control or travel restrictions were implemented, that they are able to return, and that our most vulnerable people, people who have been provided, we've had to provide accommodation, food and care packages, medication, people who are receiving that kind of care now from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs through its missions overseas, we're trying to ensure that they get in first. So I'm asking you to, you can apply in good time. It's not necessarily first come, first serve, because it's monitored by health. But give the site a little time. And if you know this site is not about you right now, maybe you don't need to test it out because it works. We can assure you. Okay? Have a good evening. Thank you, Prime Minister.
So just to be clear on the questions. Right. So under the Disaster Risk Management Act orders that were announced and gazetted, the current 24-hour curfew orders for St. Catharine would have ended on 6 a.m. on Tuesday, April 28th. That is tomorrow, right? So the new orders now would start at 6, start the same day on Tuesday, but at 6 p.m. and goes through to 6 a.m. on Wednesday, ends, and then restarts on Wednesday again at 6, that period, goes right through until Friday morning at 6 a.m. So just to be clear, Attorney General, just make sure that I'm saying it the correct way, because a 24-hour curfew. Right. So it would commence right away. So it's not in the PM. Once it comes down, it starts back immediately. Right. So the best way to explain it, AG, is that it just starts again. So it just repeats itself. So the cycle just starts again. So right. So we will have a 24-hour curfew, and that will restart on Tuesday, and it will end on Friday, Friday would be the 1st of May at 6, yes, which is what I'm saying. So Wednesday would be a shopping day. Yeah. So that's it. Three additional days with one shopping day included. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. It's been a very long press conference, but it shows you that your government is working, and we have a lot of information to share with you. Good evening. Have a good night.